All right, ladies, we're back in the book of Acts, and so we are going to go to wherever my notes are. Acts chapter 17. Yeah, 17. So last week we looked at the kind of the cosmic chess match again as one of the things I kind of fitting with what Pastor was talking about in the spiritual warfare realm. I know where I put it. I want you to see how there is this chronic, constant chess match between the Lord and Satan. And one of my favorite quotes from Erwin Lutzer gives a depiction of Satan being God's instrument of judgment for the disobedient and purification for the obedient. Our war with him teaches us about the nature of sin, our own helplessness apart from grace, and our need for God. And, you know, I could easily substitute for the word instrument his pawn. Now, I'm not a chess player, so I don't know I don't even know all the pieces, okay? I know there's a rook, there's a pawn, there's knights, there's, yeah, all that fun stuff, the king and the queen and all that. But I do know that, and I won't go into gory detail, but I do know that there is a preparation being made for a cosmic battle. And I do know that Satan's minions think they're going to win. Okay? They really do. They are under that delusion. You've got to remember that Satan himself has become so... If you think about Nebuchadnezzar and the judgment that was rendered on him because of his pride, right? He went insane, okay? It was Satan's pride that got him kicked out, okay? Pride, the ultimate result of pride is going to be insanity, okay? And so Satan and his minions, because they follow him, they want to function independent of God. Pride is, I don't need God. I'm going to do what I want to do when I want to do it. I will decide what's good, what's evil. It's always going to dissolve you down into insanity because it is something that only God himself has the capacity for. So when you're trying to function as God and being your own God, it's going to lead you to irrational, insane conclusions. Okay? And so those who follow Satan are not thinking on truth. They don't want truth. The truth irritates them. This is why when we proclaim truth, they get irritated. Okay? Turn to chapter 17 because we're going to see some irritation. All right, so they've just had their encounter, this extraordinary experience in Philippi, the jailer's family after the earthquake and all that fun stuff, and they come to faith and they get led out of town, and the leadership there of Philippi is eating crow. So they went on from there and they go to Amphipolis, Apollonia. All of these, Apollonia, again, you're dealing with a Greek territory because they're named after these. Here's one thing I want you to understand, that the place that they're going to has a worldview that is polytheistic. Okay? So these gods, Apollo, the god of the sun, okay, they're going to know, I don't know who Amphi would be, but you know, you've got Zeus, you've got Apollo, you've got Athena, all these Greek deities. Again, when we go back and realize where did they originate from, they came from the Watchers, these fallen ones, and from all the way back to Genesis 6. Okay? So the origin of the Greek, Norse, and Roman mythology goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 6 and the fall of the Watchers, the fall of the angelic realm that followed Satan that we read about in Revelation. Okay? So all of them have those roots in these deities that again, we can go back to Deuteronomy where it talks about God dividing up the nations. He keeps Israel for himself. When he divided up the nations, he says, okay, to the Watchers, you want to be me, you want to rule, okay, we're going to kick you out to earth. I'll give you these nations. And so these entities, these Watchers, were given this territory, okay? And it was theirs. okay, by legal standing before the council, it was given, but God had a purpose in it. They thought, all right, we want all this land. This is why Israel's so disputed over. It's the one piece of territory that God refused to give Satan. And Satan's like, I want this. I want it all. The earth is mine. I want it all. But Jesus is the one that opens the seals, all right, the title deed. All of this, if you can see the whole of Scripture, you understand a clearer picture of what's this cosmic battle about. And it's about redeeming not only mankind, but the earth, and Satan and all of his minions being ruled against, and all of creation realizing how bad sin is and pride is, so that it never happens again. Okay? So that there is no entity of any creation, no matter what they are, angelic being or human, that rebels against God again. Because they're seeing, all of cosmic creation is seeing how bad sin and rebellion is.
My brain is still trying to wrap around the idea of deed. I don't know if I ever heard that before. And now you just said that was like the deed to the earth. To be entitled to the
When
earth.
Satan,
And
when
Israel was, but all the rest.
This is in
And that's
Deuteronomy.
reference to the deed.
Right. Well,
Or type.
you know, one of,
It's going to take you off the
yeah, well,
later.
yeah, we can.
Okay, we'll talk.
Anyway, all right, chapter 17. He arrives in Thessalonica, and what's he go to? He finds a synagogue. Okay, remember in the previous territory, there wasn't a synagogue. They meet down by the river. So they go to the synagogue, they start preaching. And he reasoned with them for 3 Sabbaths, and he was explaining and giving evidence that the Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead. And he said, this Jesus who I am proclaiming to you is Messiah. Okay? Now again, to the Jews, one of the reasons why God would send them to the Jews first isn't just because he loves them more than Gentiles. It's because they have a world view that is steeped in the Old Testament. Okay? They have a monotheistic view. Lord our God is one, and you shall know the gods before him, and all that. They had that frame of reference. It was much easier to reason with them than a polytheistic reference, and we'll see that when he winds up in Athens. Okay? So he gets there, he's reasoning with them, and we're going to see that some were persuaded, and they joined Paul and Silas, verse 4, along with a great multitude of God-fearing Greeks. So Greeks have been coming to understand who Yahweh is, and then, this is a very key thing, a number of the leading women. Okay? Women had a very, in the polytheistic cultures, women were not, there were Greek deities that were female. Okay? So women had a greater leading role in society, a little different, okay, than in Jewish culture. But the Jews became what? What's the key word there? They became jealous, okay? And it's just like what happened with Jesus, okay? When Jesus was getting followers, when I was studying this and looking at this, it made me think of social media. It made me think of the deep state, okay? You know, we've got all these people listening to alternative news like me on YouTube for what's really happening, and the mainstream media is freaking out because they're losing followers, okay? So deep state's losing control, they're losing followers. So we got Antifa rises up, okay, anti-First Amendment, okay? So they create havoc and a distraction, okay? So we've got all this stuff going around because the people in their pride didn't want to lose their followers. It's almost like they're losing their social media followers to this alternative news. So here we've got Paul and Silas preaching this alternative to what they're teaching, and they're losing followers, and they're having a fit. Okay? So they find some wicked people, we'll name them Antifa people, paid by George Soros, from the marketplace, and they form a mob, and they set the city in an uproar. Okay? And they came to the house of Jason, and they were looking for him there, and they didn't find them, and they drugged Jason and some of the other brethren before the authorities, saying, these men have set the whole world, see the extreme? Wow. They've set the whole world on fire with this teaching. So all these false extreme accusations were waged against them. Jason has to post bail, I'm going fast here, I apologize. He gets accused, they go, these false accusations that they're speaking of another king, Jesus. We only have one king, Caesar. Sound familiar? Goes all the way back to what Jesus was dealing with. Yeah, we only have one king, it's Caesar. Same thing that the Satan's strategy deployed against Jesus was deployed against Paul and Silas. So they stirred up the crowd and the authorities and all that, and they posted bail and they released them. Okay, so these guys were under immediate persecution. They come to faith, immediate persecution. Paul and Silas, verse 10, they get sent out by night. They slink out by night, and they head to Berea, and they go right to the synagogue. Okay, and they start teaching the Jews. Now this is why you'll hear me say, be a Berean. Okay, the Bereans were more noble-minded. When they were taught, they then went and searched the scriptures to see if what the teaching was accurate. Okay, we should do that with everybody we sit under. Okay, just because somebody says it doesn't make it so. We need to be students of the Word, self-taught in a sense. We need to know how to examine the scriptures ourselves and make sure what we're being taught is correct. It's very important. So these Bereans received with eagerness this teaching. They were, many believed, along with, same thing, prominent Greek men and women. So we've got Jews and Gentiles side by side coming to faith. But now Berea and Thessalonica were not far apart. Okay, it'd be like, it's probably closer than Allentown and Bethlehem.
Oh,
or I mean,
wow.
Allentown and Philadelphia, that's what I meant. Okay, probably more like Bethlehem and Allentown, city proper. Okay, not far apart. And so the Thessalonians hear about this, and these Jews that are jealous of him, they send their mob, and they start agitating and stirring up the crowds just like before. So immediately Paul and Silas, they put their heads together and say, we need to protect our fledgling church here, so we're going to split up. So the plan was that Paul would immediately leave because he was the main teacher and main target, and they set him out on a boat, and he winds up in Athens. Silas and Timothy were to come afterwards, and that is indeed what takes place. So Paul is waiting for them in Athens. His spirit was provoked because he's right into the heart of polytheistic Greek teaching. And so he's not going to sit by and wait for these guys. He sees a city full of idols. It irritates his spirit. And he starts reasoning he finds a synagogue, goes to the Jews, starts reasoning with them and the Greek-fearing, God-fearing Gentiles. And he goes to the marketplace every day. Because in the marketplace you have these Epicureans and these Stoics arguing all the time, debating philosophies. Now, to the Epicureans, all life is reduced to atomic matter. Okay? You're just a pile of cells. So the chief thing in life is to indulge the flesh. There's no meaning to life, so it's eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow you're going to die and just become a pile of ashes. Okay? You're going to decay. So they were hedonists, indulging in pleasure. The Stoics believe that developing self-control is the means of overcoming destructive emotions. To the Stoic, the emotions were the problem. So you have to rule your emotions. You should not feel. So nature is rational, passion isn't. So you fight against the emotions. So these guys were always arguing with each other. Now in comes Paul. Okay?
Sorry.
And he starts teaching about Jehovah, a monotheistic God with three parts, okay? And it's totally contrary to what they understand, their encounter with these Zeus and Apollos and all these other guys. So they took him, he's at Mars Hill, and he starts preaching, and he points out, he uses their stuff against them. He says, look, and I'm going down to verse 22. He stood in the midst of the Areopag, that place. Men of Athens, I observe you are very religious in all respects. So he gives them credit for that. He says, look, while passing through and examining your idols, I find one that has an inscription to an unknown God, just in case they missed one. Okay? So therefore, what you worship in ignorance, I'm going to tell you who this unknown God is, who you don't know. And he goes back to pointing out that God is creator. Okay? The God who created the world and all things in it. He is Lord of heaven and earth. He doesn't dwell in temples made with hands. Lots of temples, different gods all around them. Okay? Parthenon, I've been there. You know, there's all kinds of temples all around Greece to these deities. And he's like, look, he doesn't dwell in temples made with hands. Neither is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself has given life and breath to all things. Much of their worship involved, and still in a lot of these pagan cultures, you have to leave food and drink and all of that to these deities. They need you to do this. They want you to do this to appease them. Verse 26, he made from one every nation of mankind, pointing to Adam, to live on the face of the earth, having determined their appointed times and boundaries of their habitation, that they should seek God, if perhaps they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far off from each one of us. Again, he's pointing to the fact that it's wired into us to seek God, to be connected to God, because in the beginning, we were connected to God. So it's innate within us to want to seek that reconnection. So for in him we move and live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said. So he points to their own poets. He's very strategic. We're also his offspring. Being then the offspring of God, we ought to think, not to think that the divine nature is like gold or silver, stone or image, the art or thought of man. Therefore, having overlooked these times of ignorance, God is now declaring to men that everywhere all should repent, because he has fixed a day in which there will be judgment. So he points to that. He says, look, God has revealed himself. Judgment is coming. We are not to be worshiping idols of gold. You know, when they got to the point of resurrection, they started to laugh. They thought it was not just laugh, but sneer. But then they were like, okay, we'll hear. We're getting there, Av. Yeah. So Paul went out of their midst, and some of the men joined him, and they believed. But it was a battle between the spiritual forces of darkness and the spiritual forces of light. You know, and again, Greek mythology was so entrenched, and the Greek mindset was based on pride. We're right, we're right, we're right. That's why they were arguing so much. But the idolatry was proof that they knew innately they needed to seek God. You know, and as we realize that we go out in this world, we're up against a fight. But greater is he who's in us than he who's in the world, right?
Absolutely.
And the resurrection is the key. It's the pivotal point of all history, is the resurrection, because it was proof that Jesus' blood did pay the penalty. And when we engage in spiritual warfare prayer, it's always on the basis of the finished work of the cross and of the blood of the Lamb.